So I wasn't even gonna watch this show because I try not to watch things that I don't care about just for making a video because I feel like it's disingenuous, but then I signed up to do a MsMarvel video for Screen Rant because I need me monies, so here we are. Now, I've seen all of the Marvel shows except for What If because I don't care about in-universe fanfics, and Hawkeye because who gives a fuck about Hawkeye? And I've been lukewarm on everything so far, partly just because I think the 6-episode structure is way too strict to do anything really interesting. And unfortunately, I think that happened here too, but let me talk about what I enjoyed first. So the first episode is by far the best. It's the most creative with blending the world with Kamala's inner thoughts and text messages that I just love seeing in things. It's got the only cool shot in the whole show, and it's just this. So don't expect this to be some type of tour de force for cinematography, but I also don't know why you would think that to begin with. But the most important thing of all, Kamala is likable in this. Now, it's not like I had a problem with her before in the comics, I just never really cared. I'm not really a teen superhero fan, unless you count Spider-Man, but that's really only like Spectacular and I guess Tom's first trilogy, but I would never actually just check out a Champions or Young Avengers comic. Part of that is because most adults don't know how to write kids and teenagers. There's either too much angst or they're just super annoying. Kamala's not really like that. Sure, she's an Avengers stan, and I hate stans, but she's also supposed to be 16, so yeah, a 16-year-old girl is gonna be a little annoying, but I don't think that the show ever goes too far to make her unlikable. As a person who is not and was not a teenage girl, I can only say that she's at least similar to some of the more, how can I put this nicely, eccentric girls that I went to high school with. Also, the show makes it very clear that Kamala and Bruno love slushies, and if you only need to know one thing about me, is that I don't play when it comes to being a slushie connoisseur, so I was really excited to watch the rest of the series after that first episode. The problem is, the rest of the series is almost nothing like that first episode. But, there's still some good things that I want to talk about before I get into the things I didn't like. Starting off, I love how much Pakistani culture is brought up in the show. As it's something I know nothing about, it was really cool seeing it being at the forefront of the story. I also really appreciate them not only explaining why Indian and Pakistani culture is so similar, but also giving the historical context behind it and tying that in with Kamala and her family's history. It's like how every time Magneto is in something, they bring up World War II and the concentration camps. It's too bad they never tie into anything good, but there's also barely any good historical events, so I guess that makes sense. And while I didn't really care about any of the other characters except Kamala's dad, he was fun, I do think that everyone gave a decent performance, especially Kamala's mom when she's talking to her or about her mom. But that's all I actually got for positives, which really sucks to me because that first episode had so much promise. Although I think it was cool that the show ends up in Pakistan for Kamala to somewhat connect to her roots, it's also where the show just gets really boring to me, especially since it's not really all that important for her to even be there. You think that she would need to be exactly where the thing in her family happened, and she goes there, but nope, everything that's important actually just happens in a random alley. Her bangle gets hit, and she's suddenly transported to the past. The bangle is just something that is supposed to unlock and amplify her powers, and later we find out that it can actually have her to teleport to, but that doesn't matter. It can also transport you back in time and create a time loop too, I guess. I was gonna give it the benefit of the doubt while watching it and say that it was just a dream sequence, but then she comes out with the picture that her great-grandma gave her, so I guess it can also teleport you as well back in time for some reason. And that kind of ties into one of my biggest issues with the series, which is that it focuses on the things that I don't think were really all that important and completely rushes past things that I think deserve some kind of explanation. A very good example of that is the villain. So let's talk about this villain of the story because it may be the worst underdeveloped one that I can remember. So this lady, whose name I do not remember and will not look up, was friends with Kamala's great-grandma back in the Noor dimension, a place that we barely know anything about. And she wants to get back there because apparently they were exiled. We never find out why they were exiled, and we never find out anything else about that dimension. Instead, we get a whole lot of nothing about characters that Kamala barely interacts with. And then, at the end, the villain is just like,
I don't want to do this no more.
Another character that they spent a lot of time on is Kamran, who really had no business having so much time dedicated to him. And I know that he's important to Kamala in the comics, But since they already changed his powers to be closer to hers, I feel like they could have also reinvented him to be a little more interesting. We're probably not going to see him for a while since we don't even know where Kamala's character is going to go after the Marvels, which I assume is going to be way more high stakes than this show ever was. But I did like the low-key nature of it, especially since I think that if they tried to make this some kind of big huge adventure for her like the other shows, it wouldn't really fit with her character, so I'm glad that they took this route. I do wish that they spent more time with her training and maybe even fighting crime in Jersey before going to Pakistan, and then maybe having the finale take place there instead, because I don't think that damage control in this was anything but annoying and lame, which sucks, because it's such a cool concept in the comics. I really just wish that the show didn't just completely dip after that first episode. There's also a bunch of just little weird things that happen in the show, like these federal cops not knowing or fucking seeing a car drive past them and then being confused about where Kamala went, but I'm just gonna move on before I start nitpicking things that I really don't even care about. So let's talk about something that a bunch of people act like they care about: comic accuracy. So, before this show even came out, a bunch of people were upset that Kamala got a new origin and powers. For me, I'm always down for things to be changed if they don't fit the new adaptation or they just have a better idea to modernize it or something. For Kamala, obviously, because she's fairly new, it's not like she needs to be modernized, but adapting her to the MCU would have to be slightly different. Now, I'm not a comic purist because one, that's fucking stupid when comics change all the time, and two, because I don't think doing a one-to-one adaptation of anything is ever really a good idea, because at that point, what's the point of the project even being made? I personally don't understand why you would want to see the same story you've already read or seen before. But, you know, the world is full of weirdos. Now, with all of that being said, I don't mind the new changes. One, because Marvel obviously do not want to include the Inhumans properly given how they massacred my boy Black Bolt. And aside from him and Lockjaw, no other Inhuman even matters, so it's not like people are missing out on anything. Especially since she still has the same stretching and embiggening powers as she does in the comics, but now she's got an additional one in using hard light. And just in case you actually want to watch the show or you're not caught up and you don't want to get spoiled, because this last part is actually really important because it changes a lot of the MCU, and yes, I am stretching this out so that if you wanted to leave, you can do it right now. I actually really like the change of her being a mutant. The Inhumans were literally only pushed recently because of Marvel not having the rights to them outside of the comics, and as you could probably tell, I, and no one else, actually care about them. The last time I can even think of an Inhuman being important was during Civil War II, and I don't know if you know this, they could have easily switched out that Inhuman for a mutant or literally any other character, because again, they do not matter. And again, because people love to blow things out of proportion and act like things matter when they don't, I've seen some people acting like it's a very big deal and that the change is terrible and that she should maintain that aspect of her character like it matters. To me, this is just as inconsequential and dumb a thing to get mad at as if they changed the borough that Spider-Man is from. Like, yeah, sure, that is something that he talks about from time to time, but he's still a New Yorker. It's the exact same thing with the Inhumans and X-Men. Yeah, they get their powers from different sources, but there is no real difference between them, and an Inhuman can pass off as a mutant just as a mutant can pass off as an Inhuman. I understand that with labels, things matter. This is not one of them. If it were something like, oh, she didn't have stretchy powers at all, or they changed her Pakistani background, I could see and understand why some people would be mad. But this, to me, is just dumb, especially because they wouldn't have been able to introduce her without introducing all of the other Inhumans because of how they're even made. And that's a lot to just put in 6 episodes. That's a lot to put in a movie. Personally, I think Doctor Strange's mom is the last time we're gonna see the Inhumans for a very long time, if we see them again in the MCU at all, and that even goes for the heavy hitters in the mutant community. I think that from what I know about Kamala in the comics, her kind heart, her standing of Captain Marvel and the rest of the Avengers, and her being a goofy teenage girl are all the things that are legitimately important to her character, and all those things are present, so it's all good to me. I don't see the problem. So when you're talking about comic accuracy, I think it's way more important to talk about how they maintain the spirit of the character rather than aesthetic differences. So moving on to the final thoughts, I really did enjoy the first episode of the show and came out of it more excited for the rest of the series than I have for any other MCU show. And let me remind you that Falcon and the Winter Soldier had 6 hours of Anthony Mackie goodness, and I love me some Mackie, but just like with every other show, the ending left a lot to be desired. I'm interested to see where they take MsMarvel, and I am a little more interested in her as a character than I was going into it, but that's all I got for this show. I'd say watch the first episode because it is a lot of fun as a sort of introduction to the character if you're completely in the dark about her, but aside from that, you could probably just skip this entire thing.